Hello everyone, Tyler Piper here from Five Tool Productions alongside Connor Clardy and Jake Steiner, also from Five Tool, and this is in fact the Create Smarter podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. We've got a great episode today lined up for you, and it all stems from kind of an interesting article that we read off the Content Marketing Institute, and it was all about the results from their latest survey. And we were talking about things this afternoon, going through some of the statistics and numbers, and I hate this survey and everything it stands for. No, that's a little over the top, but pretty darn close, to be honest with you. So, Video and Visual Storytelling Survey 2023. So when I say that I hate some of the stats, it actually wasn't necessarily the statistics, because you can't change the way people feel. It's just the way they actually summarize some of the stats, as well as some of the actual questions that they asked, and some of the options that were given. It was a little misleading, and I don't think it necessarily painted the perfect picture. So with this in mind, I feel like this is a good opportunity for us to kind of go through some of these stats, look through, dive in, dissect what we think is actually going on and what people's opinions are, and what does this actually stand for, the state of video as it pertains to 2024.
Yeah, very broad stroke question.
Yeah, it was kind of a little bit crazy. Was there anything for you guys that jumped off the paper for you at all?
I think just from our conversation earlier is kind of the idea that numbers don't lie, but the way you present them is very important. And I think we'll get into that later. But no, I think I guess being in the video world 24/7 is happy to see that the trend is going up. I mean, like you're saying, year after year, everyone wants more video in general, and then it's interesting to explore how companies are using them, the results they see, and just how effective they are day to day.
So with that, I was going to say that what you were just talking about, the statistic is, the first one that we're going to go ahead and get to is 67% of marketers say video has become more important to their business in the last year. What's really interesting, I'm actually would be curious to see if you were to go back and see, well, what did people say in 2022 or in 2021 and 2020? It's probably more prevalent every single year that probably 50 to 60 to 70% of people say, yep, we're going to be using more video next year. Yep, we're going to be using more video next year. So the increase is there. People really want it, Jake.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it, going back to what we said, like things that like kind of jumped out, it was odd. Again, we live in the video world, so we have our, perception of the outside world, but to see how many organizations, and I'm sure we'll touch on it more, are using in-house media teams. It jumped out in terms of the amount of production that we are seeing with organizations through social media, and the evolution of production, like you talked about over the years. Why some people are still sticking with the iPhone and still doing that style of production. That's what jumped out to me specifically. So I'm sure we'll discuss more about it, but just going back to that.
Well, what's really interesting is I think a lot of the numbers, if you actually dive into this study, a lot of the numbers have to do with one another. So like a perfect example, the one that you just said. So most marketers, 69% of them produce videos in-house. Now, you can say, when you read that, you took it as, they must be doing it with iPhones. Now, I also look at it and say, well, maybe they've actually have a big, giant creative team. So we don't know exactly the size of the companies that were actually responding to this. Is it a massive conglomerate that, of course, Marriott Hotels or a massive shoe dealer like Nike, they have these people in-house that are creating things that aren't necessarily the phones? Or are they small, medium-sized companies that, it's just one person that has a DSLR or has an iPhone? So that's the part to me that, again, I really love that they got this information, but it's not telling me the whole story, right? What are the other pieces in here that I need to know to say, well, is this a small company just doing it themselves, or is it a large company doing it themselves? And I think that's where I'd love to see it take one step further to kind of educate me just a little bit more as well.
Yeah, give it a little more transparency. Just dive into these numbers and say, out of that 69%, what are we looking at here?
Yeah. Exactly. Who are these people? And I know obviously they're not going to do that. Well, that's Jim from Bob's Discount Home Furniture, right? Like, you're not going to hear that.
But to see Home Furniture versus Barstool or something like that, because it's very hard to compare those teams where they have dedicated teams who have a mission, have a goal, and everyone knows what they're doing. cameras roaming around the office versus somebody who has an intern with an iPhone.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. No, and the part that was really interesting about this, and this kind of the numbers that, they had the hundreds of stats inside the article and inside the report. And I definitely advise you to go ahead onto Content Marketing Institute to go ahead and give a read of some of the information. But, some of the ones that we pulled out, another one was, what was the reasons what's the biggest problem with creating some of this video content? What's the hurdle for you? Mm-hmm. And when they went into it, the time to produce videos is the biggest challenges cited by most respondents, and that 69% of people said, the time to produce this. But now when I go back and I look and say, well, most marketers, actually 69%, are doing it in-house, but then 69% of the respondents also say, I don't have enough time to create it. Well, why wouldn't you do it externally then?
Yeah,
if this is our hurdle.
That battle back and forth of, do you outsource it? Do you do it internal so it's more authentic and XYZ? But then if you choose the latter, you got to have time and to do it and to make the content worth it.
Exactly. And to me, this kind of goes back to what I was saying in the beginning. I'd love to see how many people responded to things earlier in the year or previous years, because I'm curious to know was time always the thing? Because I remember looking back several years ago and saying it was always budget.
Yep.
People didn't have the budget for it. Now, when you look at it, and some of the stats did show this, more people have a budget for this, and we'll get into what their budgets actually are later on. But when I hear these things and when I look at them, I say to myself, well, why aren't we doing it externally? Yeah. If we are saying, well, we create all this content in-house, and almost 3/4 of the people are creating it in-house. But again, 3/4, and I don't know if it's the same 3/4 or not that are doing it in-house, say, but my biggest problem is having enough time to go ahead and do it. On that list, number 5 on that list was budget. So they didn't even care about budget, right? At the end of the day,
throw money at it.
It's fine. It'll fix everything.
But the time is the most.
The time was the most interesting of it all. And I'd say, okay, well then, why don't we fix that? I mean, that seems to me like that's an easy thing then.
Right.
Just give it to an external.
I don't have time to do it. I'll pay you to do it.
Yeah.
It seems like it's a very easy solution there.
Yep. No, it definitely is. All right. Kind of the next stat I wanted to get to was that only 7% of marketers say their organization uses existing videos to their full potential. So one of the things with this in particular that I thought was pretty cool was the fact that they aren't using it the way they actually think they should, right? Like they think they could and should be doing more. And this is the part I kind of want to focus on. Connor, why do you think that they feel like they should be doing more?
I think it's because, again, from our world to theirs is we look at one video as, you make it then and you chop it up as much as you can and you make it last as long as it can. That lifetime of that video should be as long as it possibly can be. I think some people, especially in the survey, may look at a video and say, all right, we made this one video for this one reason and we're going to post it this one time. And, hopefully you get that benefit out of it. But then they, like you're saying, don't use it to the full potential. It just disappears. It goes into the catalog and never seen again. And I think we preach, reuse content, snip it up, use it with other content. Like, don't let it die after your event or your campaign or whatever it is. There's a lot of potential in that video that you put time, money, effort into shooting. Why not make it last a little longer?
And what about you, Jake? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, one of the stats that kind of another part of the survey that actually stuck out was what videos these organizations were actually creating. And I think the top 2 or out of the top 3, 2 of them were how-to videos, and then brand marketing stories, so branding stories. And when you think about those 2 different style of videos, like those take production. Those, whether it's you want to represent your brand properly, you want to have something that if said a new employee was looking at your company and your brand, you would want them to see that and say, okay, they took their time, they took care of this video, it mattered to them. And if you can't look at your video and feel that way, then you can't, feel like you're using it to the full potential. So that very well could be some of the outlook on some of the videos.
The two issues I feel like, and we're just the creation company. We're not the marketing agency that gets, puts behind, here's where it should go, here's where it should live. But we see it all the time that people will say, we're going to just use this video and we're going to put it solely on our webpage.
Right.
Or we're only going to be using it at our event. I mean, we have a few clients that will produce content for their event, and they're great, impactful stories, and they're fantastic. You guys went to one that was just an awesome shoot, but it just lived at their event. It hasn't lived on elsewhere, right? So you didn't get the full effect, while people at that event might have given money because they said, oh my goodness, this is a wonderful story. Why not leverage it after the fact as well, a few times over in email campaigns and marketing campaigns? And the other part of that too is you might be sick of the video. I mean, we see that internally all the time.
Right.
We get sick of seeing the same video over and over and over again. The possibility that your audience is actually seeing it over and over and over again is slim and none, unless you're running an ad that goes on the NFL every single weekend and you say, oh gosh, I'm sick of that. It's not the case. The vast majority, which I think, based on the budgets that people are talking about here, that they're only creating smaller social media content, things like that. Go ahead and use it again, like you said, reuse, recycle it, repurpose it in different formats, right?
Yeah.
Like, we have to do that. And the other piece that I think is a major issue when it comes to, well, we didn't see the value of that video, is because so often, and we see it all the time, people come to us, they say, well, I want to create a video about this, and it needs to say these 4 things, and this is what we're going to say, and this is the style we need to do it in, and here's my budget, here's how it's going to go. Instead of stepping back and saying, what does my audience actually care about? What are the things that I need to say to them and talking with them, or polling and surveying them and understanding what they want to hear and understand about? They're just forcing their message. That's kind of the other piece. So it's twofold. One, it's where are you going to be pushing this message? How are we going to be getting it out there? And number two, well, what's the messaging actually going to be, and making sure it's the right way to put it together? Because I think sometimes people say the marketers, the CEOs, the CMOs, they're creating something that appeases them when it needs to appease the audience at the end of the day too. And that's usually where things miss at the end of the day too.
Right.
So there's kind of that piece. All right, let's talk about budgets. This one was another one that kind of irked me, because the way it was phrased in the article was that, wow, 2/3 of the people that we surveyed responded by saying they spend less than $10,000 a year on video creation. Well, I mean, just looking at their pie chart, it was about 52%, not 2/3. So that was off. I was like, 50%, half of the people versus 2/3. So that was incorrect. But the way they set it up was like, wow, a lot of these people have teeny tiny budgets of $10,000 or less. One, you can do a lot of content. I mean, we know it. For about 10 grand or less, you can still do a lot of content.
Yeah.
But then if you look at it, if 52% spend less than $10,000 a year, well, guess what? 48% spend more than that.
Yeah.
And if you looked at the numbers, 13% of the people that responded spend over $100,000 a year.
Yeah,
now, I don't know as if $100,000 pertains to just the creation of the content, or is that part of their marketing, like their ad spend on an advertisement or social clicks or whatever it may be. But if we're talking about just creation alone, that number was crazy.
That's
the
a lot
amount of content that you're creating is incredible. Or the quality. It might be a cinematic story that we're talking about here. So I hated the way they phrased it in the article. It drove me crazy. But, they almost said like, they're only spending 10 grand or less. One, I don't know the size of the company. So that also plays a big role into it.
Yep.
And number two, how am I saying they're not using 10 grand or less, and they're using it wiser than the people that are spending $50,000 on one ad.
Right.
Right. So that's what we kind of preach all the time, guys, right?
Yeah. And I think to separate money from quality, I would say, is some people might get hung up on that and say, I spent $50,000 on this thing. Why am I not seeing the results I want to see and, getting the donations I need? Is because you have to go back to day one. What's the script? What is the message? What is the actual content that your audience is seeing? If it feels fake, or if it feels forced, or if it, looks like it's $50,000, it might not be the right way to approach your goal and get that message across to that audience.
There's a time and a place for all the different content, right, Jake?
Absolutely. Perfect point is, if your audience base is following you, primarily through social media, maybe you don't need the $100,000 production on a single video. Unless that is what your audience has come to expect. Is, if you are one of these big sports brands, they expect the lights, the fog, the players coming through. But it all comes back to knowing your audience and knowing what attracts your audience, what keeps your audience engaged, and just continuing to target your audience that way.
Mm-hmm. Now, the one thing that I really want to do right now is, to wrap everything up, is I want to dive into, they actually had action steps: strategy and story drive videos, real value. So they had 3 key points in their article: invest in the process, develop measurement plans, and use competency of quality to drive quantity. So first one, invest in the process. Now, I don't think this is like a Gary V moment where it's like, fall in love with the process, man. We're going to enjoy this. I think this is something that, Connor, that we talk about all the time, about templates.
Yes.
You're a template guy.
I'm a big template guy.
Talk to me about the importance of that process and having something streamlined, because it will help keep budget down too.
Yeah, and you talk about keeping budget down. I also think just keeping, you throw on the word authenticity, but having that through line of saying let's, for example, a Giving Day campaign, right? Everything's going to look the same, going to feel the same, and it's not going to cost you $50,000 because you already have the things set aside of, if I know I'm going to make a video either for social or for an email, send out or whatever it is, I already have that template, let's call it, set aside. I know what it's going to look like, what the vibe is, what the basic message is going to be, and in some cases the footage is already there, and I just have to repurpose it and make it into the product I want it to be, keeping budget down, but thinking about the process of making that suite of videos, not just a single, output person.
And that's one of the things that's great. I mean, Jake, you've been on the other side of Connor telling you, here's our template, use this template. Let's go ahead and use this, leverage it. But I will say this, whenever we have something that is almost episodic, whether it's a podcast or if it is something that we say is more, we're going to be doing several of these pieces of content, that first one's always tough. The second one gets a little easier. But by the third one, you hit your stride. It's
money.
Right? It's so much easier. It's money.
It's money.
All right, their second point, develop measurement plans. So we've got to care about more things than just views, right, at the end of the day. Jake, what are some of the things that, you say measurement-wise, that you, and you don't have to have the right or wrong answer to this, what are the measurement things that you think are interesting?
Not just, we talk about it all the time, like, coming back to audience, kind of like the last point I made, is you don't have to hit the most amount of people. You just need to hit the right people. If you hit the right people the right way and they really, fall in love with whatever you're pushing or, your brand itself, that's it. It truly can all be worth it with just the one right audience member. So, in a lot of cases, maybe don't, only focus on the view count or the likes or the favorites or the shares, focus on, now, who did I meet from this? Where did this allow me to go from here? And I think that's far more important than just staring at a view count.
Awesome. Love it. I love that. All right. The last one is basically quality drives quantity. So we've seen that a lot. We talk about churning everything out as much as possible. Reuse. Well, I think that's kind of a big part. If you focus and put a lot of time into something that is really good, reuse it. But also don't put out just a ton of crap, right? At the end of the day, like that people aren't going to care about, just so you can get a couple more likes, a couple more shares, a couple more
the algorithm, all that kind of thing. I think is what people focus a lot of, is just getting eyes on the content. I have to keep posting every day, and that's fine, but it could, backfire, and people say, oh my God, it's this, I was thinking NFL, but it's the same commercial over and over again. Okay, yeah, Liberty Bibbity, we get it. What's do something new, get it something fresh. So I think every time it might backfire, and you see the same content over and over from the same piece or whatnot, and it's not quality, then it's not going to end well.
There's also a point of diminishing returns though too, because I think people, if they say, if we have $100,000 budget and you spend, I'm spending $100,000 on this one piece of content, it's damn sure going to be great. Could you have had the same results if you spent 50?
Yeah. Could
you have the same results as if you spent 10?
Yeah.
Or for the folks that are spending, for the 52%, not 2/3 of people that were spending less than $10,000 a year on this, are you more inclined to say, you know what, maybe I'm closer to spending $500?
Yeah.
Or it's subjective what is good or what's not, but quality can be the message itself. It can be the people. So I want to make sure that folks don't just get lost in, that means quality means I need to spend more.
Yeah.
Quality can spend more time on it as well, right? Don't just rush something out. But also we always say, perfect is the enemy of something that's great. So don't spend so much time that you're trying to get perfect, because the end user is subjective and they might hate the song that you chose.
Right.
They might hate that soundbite or the way that person looks on camera.
Yeah.
So you've got to make sure that we also say, I can only spend so much time, so much money, and throw so many people at this. It's good. Let's not-
Too many cooks in the kitchen.
Exactly.
Yeah, makes a bad cake.
Awesome. Very cool. All right, guys. Any final thoughts that you have before we go?
No, I just say, I think we reviewed pretty well, is, quality over quantity sometimes the other way around. But, and I think just to nail it down is repurpose, Don't focus on the one-to-one output of your video. See how long you can make it last, and I think you'll see a good return.
Yeah, and don't get hung up on the numbers. It's too many people trying to hit the algorithm the right way. Connor said it's perfectly that try to keep it fresh. Don't constantly there's different ways to innovate, but while keeping time down and there's certain ways to go about it. But keep it fresh. But
I love that.
sorry, I got lost in it, but I was doing something. But
keep it fresh is kind of a perfect word.
Yeah.
Like
100%.
And when we talk about reusing something, you don't have to reuse it 400 times in a row. You can reuse it.
Yeah.
You can reuse it this month and then 6 months from now, right? And people might say, "Oh yeah, now I remember that."
Yeah.
Right. As long as it's still in same look and feel. You don't want to be using old brand campaign videos, but it's still keep it fresh. That's what people want at the end of the day, because there's so much content. You have to find a way to cut through at the end of the day. So for Jake, for Connor, I am Tyler Piper. This has been another edition of the Create Smarter podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in, taking time out of your day to listen. We'll see you next time.